Hi everyone, Angelo here, and it's the fifth Sunday in Ordinary Time. So before we start, as you know, I do gospel reflections. But in the readings of today's liturgy, I swear, that second reading, I feel that in my soul. And I mention that because I feel like a lot of you who might be watching would also feel that in your soul. So that might be something we could contemplate extra on this week. So anyway, let's move forward. Where we have Jesus now leaving the synagogue after last week, and he's going to the house of Peter, where he finds Peter's mother-in-law sick with fever, and he heals her. And then later on in the evening, we have people from all across the town bringing Jesus the people to be healed. And then early on in the morning, just before the sunrise, we have Jesus stealing away to a lonely place to go pray. And then the disciples is like, what are you doing? Everybody looking for you. And he's like, let's go to the other towns, where we could continue preaching the good news. So if I start first with Peter's mother-in-law, it makes me feel like, okay, so she's sick with fever, right? Burning up with this fever. And I feel like the way, it happens to all of us, but the way our lives get hot, right? Things just get real hot in real life. And during that heat, the heat of all of that, a lot of times, if not all the time, all we might need is to feel the nearness of God. Because Peter's mother-in-law, once Jesus approached her, she felt better instantly. The same way too, when we feel that divine approach, it heals us in ways that we could never really put into words, but we know. So, it begs the question, how do we feel God's nearness in our lives? And for everybody it's different, well, me personally, as you all know, I'm Catholic, so Mass is a big thing in Scripture. But for everybody else, it could be so different. It could be Mass, it could be Scripture, it could be through human relationships, or even relationships with animals, with nature. Music, a lot of times too, song lyrics. Like, it have so many different ways that we get to feel God's nearness, right? But the only way we'll know the way we feel God's nearness for our own selves is to pay attention to moments where we do feel that grace, moments where we do feel that peace of God, that light of God. Because speaking of the light of God, I would like to talk about the fact that we all have chaos in our lives, right? Whether spoken or unspoken. Because as we see the people in the story here, they come in with their chaos, their brokenness, and come in to Jesus to be healed. And I feel like we look at Jesus, yes, as God, but we might often forget that as much as Jesus was fully divine, he was also fully human too. We like to look at Jesus as this impassible being. Devoid of all human emotions and experience and, falls just like everybody else. Because it's easy to do. It's easy to deify him, for lack of a better word, and detach him and remove him from our experience so that we could look to him as this figure who we go to him for healing and salvation. But nothing more, right? We go to him with our prayers, with our wishes, but that's it. But that's not God we're describing. That's a genie. The God we worship was born a baby, grew up just like all of us, was an adult like all of us, and died. Right? Of course, we know resurrection took place too, and still takes place. So, we have Jesus doing his work, and he seemed like he flourishing. I'm sure he was. But it just makes me wonder how many people really check for Jesus during this time too, right? Because during the dark of the morning is when he had to steal away to the only place. During the dark moments of his life, he went to seek sustenance in God, God the Father. He was dead tired, and what he did, he prayed. And it might seem like this pious and holy act. And sure, yeah, maybe, perhaps. But what I see when I see Jesus doing this is a person who is at his limit and feels like he has nowhere else to turn but the one who sent him. Same way with us too. our source, our life giver? Do we turn to him when we are feeling down and ready to quit, ready to give up? Because even look, when the disciples came to him and they said they're trying to bring him back into the town, and he's like, let's go to the other towns throughout Galilee so I could continue the good news there. And I'm sure that was not an easy decision for him to make at all. I mean, I'm sure even in his time there, the amount of relationships he would have developed, and the people would have loved him, and he would have loved the people. And yet he's like, no, we have to continue moving. It takes a lot of sacrifice. So, Jesus turned to God in the dark of his life. Do we turn to the God in the dark of our own lives? And how do we hear God? How do we feel God? That nearness, that light, how do we experience that in the darkness of our own lives? Again, it's different for everybody, right? But I look at, besides my family, two women in particular who are very dear to me. And they have a way of showing up, especially in the dark of my life. And again, I was talking about the theology group, CTCT. Both women are part of the CTCT as well. And this is who I fondly call the matriarch, Gloria Bertrand, and also a dear friend, Adana James. Fun fact, Adana taught me back when I was in school. And she's largely responsible for who I am today as a person. But, these women have a way of offering words of encouragement, words of hope, comfort, healing, salvation. I remember healing and salvation, these two words are closely linked. And it's not that they would necessarily know that I might be going through something or the other. Right? But again, we all have unspoken chaos in our lives. But yet they have a way of just, I don't know, making their way into my life, week by week, month by month, however the case might be. And just offering God's nearness. How do we experience that nearness? Through the relationships we have in our own lives. And again, for everybody, it's different. And yeah, the darkness exists, right? We know that for a fact. But there's nothing to be afraid of. And not because, it's inherently bad or anything like that, but rather more so because of the community we share, because of this life that we live, no matter where we are in the world. We all have people who love us. And even if we feel like we don't, because I know what it's like, if you feel like you have absolutely nobody to turn to, same way Jesus turned to God, we always turn to God as well. So, darkness isn't anything to be afraid of. At least for me, I think a lot of creative things come out of the darkness. Right? I would look at the first chapter of Genesis. In the darkness, God created light. Even as humans too, we make love often in the dark. And then even still look at babies, these lovely little creatures who grow up into these absolute heroes and, people we love dearly, and they do so many great things. All of us, we all went through it. We spent months in the darkness of our mother's wombs before we would have come out into the light. The darkness is a place of opportunity, a place of growth, a place where we get to bind together, a place where we get to help one another and move forward, because God is there always working in the darkness, always creating in order to bring forth that grace that we see every day. So, my question for us this week: how are we identifying God's light in our darkness? So, I'd like for us to contemplate on that as we go day by day and as we continue on for the rest of the year. Anyway, that's it for me. I appreciate you and I hope you all have a great week. Thank you.